Chapter 699, Rural Estate. 1. Although Xiaobo Jian hated the touch of the woman before him, he hid it well. His tone rose in pitch near the end, making it slightly flirty. As expected, the woman ate up his act. She giggled girlishly before putting her hands on Xiaobo Jian's naked upper body. Sir Xiao, I advise you to give up. Although the Emperor doesn't like Marquis Arnyuan much, it's not to the point where he would break apart Marquis Arnyuan and honored Lady Jeannie. While honored Lady Jinyi's secret identity is rather grand, it's not something that can be revealed to the world. Even if the Emperor wants to protect her, he wouldn't do it in the open. Since honored Lady Jeannie is already pregnant with Marquis Enyuan's child, the Emperor has slowly abandoned his initial notions. Actually, she didn't really understand the man under her. He was clearly a bright and strong youth, admired by many of the ladies in the capital. Why did he have to set his heart on the already married honored Lady Jeannie? Even if honored Lady Jeannie had a somewhat special identity, surely he didn't have to go this far. Marquis Arnyuan wasn't a simple man. Furthermore, his second brother, He Erlang, was one of the Emperor's imperial guards. A fierce tempest was broiling under the surface of Xiaobo Jian's gaze, but he didn't reveal any of it. Hidden under the brocade blankets, his right hand curled up into a fist, making his knuckles shine white. He hadn't thought that the Emperor would still be able to put up with He Changdi even after all he had done. This was what humans were like. They hungered for what they couldn't get. By now, Chu Lian had already become Xiaobo Jian's obsession. From what he could see, Chu Lian's position in the Emperor's heart was even greater than what he had estimated. Xiaobo Jian shut his eyes to hide the possessive glint in his gaze. After a moment, when he had calmed his emotions, he spoke once again, then about imperial concubine Wei. The woman sent another amorous smile his way. Rest assured, sister has already pulled it off without a hitch. In 2 more months, you and 6th Prince can simply reel in the net. This time, satisfaction leaked out from Xiaobo Jian's smile. His hand slid down to the woman's round bottom and groped it hard. Following that, he started moving viciously without any mercy. In the haze of movement, the woman's face became more indistinct, and finally morphed into that fresh and innocent face of the woman he longed for. Seeing that face in front of him, Xiaobo Jian could no longer hold himself back. It wasn't until darkness fell over the capital that he finally exited the room. As for the woman left on the bed behind him, her body was covered in bruises and her eyes had gone dim. When the maidservant waiting outside saw that Xiaobo Jian had left with his men, she entered the room, only to be met with the sight of her madam's abused body. She almost cried out in alarm. The desolate autumn winds heralded the arrival of October. At the start of October, news came from Shandong that the 5 noble houses of Shandong had been completely devoured by House Sima. Closely following after that came the news that Prince Yinshan had lent his army to the 6th Prince's faction. In the middle of October, Xiaobo Jian forced rich merchants to submit and support 6th Prince financially. When it came to the start of November, the Emperor suddenly fainted in court. Now his illness could no longer be hidden. Information leaked out from the Imperial Physician Institute, saying that the Emperor didn't have many days left. There was a flurry of activity at court. The Empress didn't have any sons and 2nd Prince had been imprisoned, so the battle between 4th and 6th Prince had become even fiercer. The Emperor sent out a decree, declaring Prince Wei as his temporary stand-in. Prince Wei would be the one to decide national matters, along with the cabinet. As the Emperor's illness progressed, there was even more activity both in and out of court. By the end of November, the 2 princes' factions had come to the point where they were clashing on the battlefield. Chu Lian's expected delivery date was in the first weeks of December. It wouldn't be long from now. The most dangerous place to be in right now was the capital. The moment He Changdi had returned early this morning, he had ordered Chu Lian's servants to start packing. Chu Lian had been in the middle of sewing a tiny child's undergarment in her warm bedroom. Although she wasn't good with needlework, she had learned from Xian over the past few months. She could still make a little undergarment since it was rather simple. Hearing He Changdi's footsteps, she turned to look at him with a smile. Is something the matter? Why are you back so early today? When He Changdi saw that she had set down the needlework in her hands and was about to stand up to greet him, he quickly strode over first and held her. It was already winter. While the room was kept warm, Chu Lian was still wrapped in layers. Other than her belly, her face hadn't changed much. Her entire being was wrapped up like a ball. Due to the enormous size of her belly, her circulation wasn't very good and her feet were swollen. Right now, it was painful for her to walk anywhere. As long as Changdi was around, he would always help to massage her legs if he had nothing to do. Have you felt anything in your belly today? Since it was close to her due date, Changdi would ask that every day when he returned. Seeing how large she had become, he was on edge and worried for her each day. Chu Lian smiled faintly and shook her head. No, the little fellow has been good. The little bun in her belly had stopped tormenting her once they had hit the 9-month mark. Changdi helped her over to a chaise and lowered her down slowly. As he watched Chu Lian drink some nourishing soup, he spoke with a grave expression. Liana, the situation outside is becoming more and more unpredictable. I'm sending you to a rural estate in the outskirts today. Chu Lian was astonished. We can't stay within the city any longer. Changdi nodded. There was nothing to hide from his own wife. Xiao Wujing has highly skilled assassins by his side. I'm afraid he'll try to do something to you. Chapter 700, Rural Estate, 2. Chu Lian had nothing but disgust on her face the moment Xiaobo Jian was mentioned. Ever since she had come to the Great Wu, she had immediately drawn the line with him. Who could have known that he would stick to her like gum? She couldn't even leave him behind no matter what she did. He was always lurking somewhere nearby at unexpected times. She looked down at her large belly and thought for a bit before nodding. All right, I'll go to the rural estate. However, you have to be careful even when you're alone in the capital. That very day, Changdi personally escorted Chu Lian out to a rural estate on the outskirts of the capital. Accompanying her were Wenqing, Wenlan, Xian, the 2 senior servants, as well as Great Dr. Miao, a midwife, a female physician and so on. They used a plain, unmarked carriage and traveled by some secret routes made by Prince Jin's subordinates, so no one was the wiser. Thus, Chu Lian settled into the rural estate and waited for her child to arrive. This rural estate had been bestowed upon her when the emperor had given her the title of Honored Lady Genie. She had never been here before, and she had just left it to the senior servants to manage on her behalf. It was only during this trip that she finally found out what the estate looked like. The estate was surrounded by lush, green mountains. It had been one of the imperial family's estates previously, so it had good scenery. This area was close to the tea garden that Chu Lian had bought. Despite the harsh winds of winter blowing, the tea garden was still a vibrant patch of green, giving an elegant touch to the area. The weather had been good these few days. Chu Lian had followed Great Dr. Miao's advice and would have Wenqing support her as she walked a slow round outside every day. Moving her body would be good for a smooth delivery. Changdi couldn't visit every day. Even if he managed to come to the rural estate, it would be late in the night. Chu Lian had already gotten used to his absence. On the 4th of December, the cold and frigid weather had given way for an abnormally warm and sunny day. After breakfast, Wenqing and Wenlan accompanied Chu Lian for a walk to the tea garden. Following beside them was Imperial Physician Li, the female physician who had treated Chu Lian at the spring hunt. Changdi had requested for her from the Imperial Physician Institute for Chu Lian's delivery. Afraid that Chu Lian's labor would start at any moment, Physician Li had stuck close to her side these 2 days. As the ladies accompanied Chu Lian in a slow walk, Physician Li asked with a smile, "Madam, do you feel anything different about your body today?" Chu Lian was wearing a light yellow brocade dress today. On the outside, she had a soft, white rabbit fur cloak. Her smooth hair had been pulled up into a simple bun with 2 locks framing her face, giving her youthful face a motherly appearance. Her hair was fixed in place with a single white jade hairpin. If not for her swollen belly, she might have looked like a young, unmarried lady instead. Chu Lian shook her head and rubbed her belly lovingly. "No, I feel fine. I'll be troubling you in the next few days, Physician Liu." Physician Liu was keeping pace with Chu Lian. "Not at all, madam. This is part of my job." As the warm sunshine beat down on them, it gave a golden glow to the entire tea garden. There wasn't any wind blowing today too. The warm sunlight on her body kept her warm, while the fresh air from the tea bushes brightened her mood. Chu Lian didn't feel tired at all even after walking for more than 15 minutes. As she gazed out at the fields of green, the worries from the past few days seemed to have dissipated. She turned to Wenqing and ordered, "Let's walk for another 15 minutes. Wenqing and Wenlan were happy to hear that. When the weather wasn't very good, Chu Lian wasn't willing to leave the estate at all with her cumbersome body. They would always have to coax her for a long time before she would get up and move around. Senior servant Zhong had already told them that Madame's belly was too big for her first child and that she would have to exercise often before the birth, otherwise the delivery would be difficult. If Master was around, he would have been able to persuade Madame to go out in a few words, but they didn't have that ability. While Chu Lian was walking slowly at the borders of the tea garden, she didn't notice two girls dressed as villagers not too far away. When Chu Yuan passed by the little lane next to the tea garden, carrying a basket of vegetables, she abruptly stopped and stared with wide, disbelieving eyes at the noble madam being supported by a maidservant. The handmaid Xiaoqin found it strange that her miss had suddenly stopped in her tracks. She turned to ask, "Miss, what's wrong?" Following Miss Yuan's gaze, Xiaoqin couldn't help but gasp at the sight. "Sixth miss." Miss Yuan was brought back to her senses by the maidservant's exclamation. She turned to glare viciously at the maidservant. "Quiet." Xiaoqin hurriedly nodded her head in acknowledgement. While the woman in the tea garden was dressed simply, anyone with a discerning eye would be able to tell that her clothes were all made of top-quality materials even at this distance. Her dress was made from imperial brocade, while her mantle was made of Sichuan brocade. Even that jade hairpin on her head was made from the rare and glossy white jade. Back in their days in the Ying estate, 6th Miss Chu Lian had always been a pitiful sight. She hadn't even owned any presentable accessories. However, now she was living a life of luxury, served by scores of servants. Marquis An Yuan treated her like a precious treasure. Even if she wanted to, Chu Yuan couldn't stop her immense jealousy from showing in her eyes. Even though they had been born to the same father, why was there such a huge difference in their fates? She was also a legitimate miss of House Ying. How was it that Chu Lian had been able to marry such a good husband, while she had been bestowed to a half-wit? Even Xiaobo Jian still carried lingering feelings for Chu Lian. Looking at the joy on Chu Lian's face as she enjoyed her walk in the tea garden, the venom in Chu Yuan's eyes was almost tangible. Xiaobo Jian had been searching all over for news of Chu Lian in secret. Who could have thought that she had been sent out to this rural estate by He Changdi? The fact that she had managed to stumble upon Chu Lian must have been the will of the heavens. Xiaoqin was panic-stricken by the sight of 6th Miss. She carefully reminded Chu Yuan, "Miss, let's hurry and leave. If 6th Miss finds out we're hiding here, it'll be bad for us." Chu Yuan suddenly let out a grim laugh. She pulled Xiaoqin along as she turned and ran away. In her heart, she was still thinking, "Bad for us? Mph, it's going to be bad for Chu Lian instead." Chapter 701, Labor, 1. Chu Lian suddenly felt a chill down her spine, as if someone was watching her in secret. She frowned slightly and turned back to look, only to see that there were two villager girls carrying baskets and scurrying away from them on the little lane not too far away. When Wenqing noticed that the smile on her face had slipped, she asked in concern, "Madam, what's wrong? Are you feeling any discomfort?" Chu Lian stared after the leaving backs of the villager girls for a moment longer before shaking her head. "It's about time, let's head back." That evening, as Chu Lian was standing up from the table after her dinner, there was a sharp spike of pain from her abdomen. The expression on her face put the servants in attendance on high alert. Senior servant Zhong ordered Wenqing and Wenlan to help Chu Lian to the bed with a grave expression, while she herself went to the room next door to look for Great Dr. Miao, Physician Li, the midwife and the other servants. Great Dr. Miao checked Chu Lian's pulse before nodding at the two experienced senior servants. The time had come. Everyone had been waiting eagerly and preparing for this day, so they weren't very panicked. The birthing room had already been prepared in advance, so senior servant Zhong instructed Wenqing and Wenlan, "Hurry, help madam to the birthing room." Chu Lian's labor pains had just started, so there was still time before the actual birth. While the pain came in waves, she was still able to walk somewhat with the help of the maidservants. Senior servant Gui led 2 strong menial servants away to boil hot water in the kitchen. Senior servant Zhong called over the guards that Changdi had arranged to protect the estate, telling one of them to quickly send the news that the madam's labor had started to the marquis. Chu Lian had never experienced pain like this before. Throbbing waves of pain came from her belly. Her legs had turned to jelly, and she could barely stand up. If not for great Dr. Miao and physician Li encouraging her to walk before the delivery, she would rather have just laid in bed. Despite only wearing a thin layer of home clothes in the warm birthing room, Chu Lian was sweating buckets. By the time night fell and physician Li told her she could lie down on the bed, Chu Lian let out a long sigh of relief. After the maidservants force-fed her a full meal, the real torture started. It wasn't convenient for great Dr. Miao to stay in the birthing room at this time, so he could only sit in the room outside. Physician Li would come out from time to report Chu Lian's situation to him. Senior servants Gui and Zhong were both experienced old women. They stayed in the birthing room with the midwife to help. Now Chu Lian was experiencing for herself how noble mothers were. She felt as if her lower half was being split open, along with the most extreme pain she could imagine. She gritted her teeth hard, to the point that her teeth creaked. Her hair was in a mess and sticking to her sweaty face and cheeks, making her feel even more uncomfortable. 8. Finally, with one particularly painful contraction, Chu Lian couldn't hold back her shout of pain. The maidservants waiting outside had their hearts in their throats as they listened. The midwife was also sweating profusely. The baby wasn't even ready yet, but this young madam seemed to have lost her strength already. This put the midwife in a tizzy state. Madam, you have to hang on. Bear with it. Your water has already broken. We have to get the baby out as soon as possible. The midwife reminded her urgently. Chu Lian's mind was already going fuzzy. Hang on. She wanted to hang on, but she didn't have any strength left. She couldn't even keep her eyes open. All of her strength seemed to have been sapped out of her. She really couldn't keep going on. As she thought so, Chu Lian's head slumped to the side as she fell into a dead faint. The servants and midwife were all frightened out of their minds and there was a flurry of commotion in the birthing room. Luckily, physician Li managed to calm down her emotions and took out some silver needles. She pushed them into some of Chu Lian's acupoints, making Chu Lian wake back up. Hurry, the ginseng soup. Wenlan hurriedly brought over the ginseng soup that they had prepared. Physician Li used a teapot with a long spout to make Chu Lian drink it down. After getting forced to drink that bowl of ginseng soup, Chu Lian recovered a bit of energy. Her vision was still fuzzy and her mind was also in a daze. After physician Li called out to her a few times, she frowned as her unfocused eyes stared into thin air. Even physician Li had never seen a situation like this before. She frantically shouted by Chu Lian's ear, Madam, wake up, madam. You have to endure. The baby isn't out yet. Hearing the commotion inside, even great Dr. Miao could no longer sit still. He stood up to pace around the outer room. Suddenly, there was the sound of hoofbeats from outside. Before everyone had the time to be surprised, Changdi had already swept into the outer room of the birthing area like the wind. Although he couldn't hear any cries from Chu Lian, the terrible expressions on everyone and the grave atmosphere made Changdi tense up. His handsome face went cold, like an ancient lake locked up with frost. He strode towards great Dr. Miao, his tone full of impatience and worry. Uncle Miao, how is Liana? Great Dr. Miao hadn't gone into the birthing room, so he didn't know the details. He could only speak in general. The baby is too big, so the situation isn't looking good. With great Dr. Miao's medical skill, he could naturally save Chu Lian and the child in her belly, but he couldn't guarantee that there would be no side effects to Chu Lian's health. He was also rather worried at this point. The news hit Changdi like a bolt from the blue. He had received the message while he was at Prince Jin's estate, so he had rushed back without stopping. He hadn't expected to receive this news when he returned to the estate. Thinking of the possibilities of what could happen to Chu Lian, his heart twisted in pain as if someone had taken away a chunk of it. At this time, Chu Lian's pained scream rang out from the birthing room. He Changdi immediately returned to his senses. He turned, intending to barge right into the birthing room. Xian was guarding the door of the birthing room with a heart full of anxiety. When she saw that the Marquis was about to rush in without a care, she quickly stopped him. "Master, the senior servants said that men can't enter the birthing room." There was no rationality left in He Changdi's mind at this point. All he knew was that Chu Lian had screamed out in pain. Xian didn't have any martial arts skill at all, so how could she possibly block He Changdi? She was pushed aside forcefully. By the time she climbed back up from the ground, He Changdi had already entered the birthing room. Senior servants Gui and Zhong both rejoiced inwardly upon seeing the lower half of the newborn baby. It was a young master. The midwife quickly brought the newborn over to a basin nearby and washed him clean, before bundling him into a large red blanket. When all was done, she handed over the little fellow to senior servant Gui to hold. Wenqing had already gone out to report the good news. Senior servant Gui brought their young master over to He Changdi, who was still sitting by the bedside, and exclaimed happily, "Master, it's a young heir. Congratulations, Master." The midwife and maidservants in the room chimed in with their own congratulations. However, He Changdi was still watching the sound asleep Chu Lian with a dark expression. There were still strands of hair stuck to her sweaty face, so he lovingly helped her to tuck them back behind her ear. His response to senior servant's Gui was a cold one: "Bring the child out to his nursemaid. Get great Dr. Miao to come in and look after Liana." The midwife had helped plenty of noble women give birth. This was her very first time seeing a father who only cared for his wife and didn't even glance at their child. Furthermore, the child was a boy. If it had been any other man, they would have been elated beyond belief. Senior servants Gui and Zhong muttered inwardly to themselves. Their young heir was so cute, but his father didn't even want to look at him. He didn't have any taste at all. However, they didn't dare to disobey orders in front of He Changdi. The two senior servants could only carry the new heir out to find his nursemaid. He Changdi watched as great Dr. Miao took Chu Lian's pulse. The moment the doctor put down Chu Lian's wrist, he hurriedly asked, "Uncle Miao, how is Liana's body?" Great Dr. Miao had seen how He Changdi only had eyes for Chu Lian and her health. He hadn't even glanced at his own child after becoming a father for the first time. Since he was satisfied with He Changdi's attitude, he didn't try to scare him. "Rest assured, Marquis. She's only sleeping because she used up too much strength. There won't be any negative effects from this, especially if she eats a few rounds of my special medicine. However, since she's so young and her body suffered a bout of ill health previously, I'm afraid she won't be able to feed the child normally." Great Dr. Miao's meaning was clear. Chu Lian wasn't allowed to breastfeed her child. However, since they had hired two nursemaids, they wouldn't have to worry about the heir going hungry. He Changdi stood up to see Great Dr. Miao out of the room. When Great Dr. Miao got up, he caught sight of He Changdi's rolled-up sleeve which exposed the bites covering his forearm. The bites were so deep that they were bleeding. It was clear that those had been made by Chu Lian during the birth. Chapter 703, Little Stone, 1. Great Dr. Miao shook his head. "Sit down, I'll get some ointment and help you bandage those marks." After ascertaining that Chu Lian would be fine, He Changdi could finally relax. He wasn't too concerned about the bite marks on his arm either. When he saw that Great Dr. Miao had left, he sat back down by Chu Lian's side. Once the doctor had helped to bandage the wounds, He Changdi moved a chaise over to Chu Lian's bedside. He had rushed over here from Prince Jin's estate. Furthermore, he hadn't been resting well for some time. After accompanying Chu Lian for the delivery that had taken all night and being on tenterhooks, Chu Lian was now safe and sound. Thus, He Changdi's entire mind could finally relax. Fatigue overtook him. He Changdi laid on the chaise without changing out of his clothes. He took Chu Lian's hand into his own and gripped that smooth and soft hand. As his mind reached a peaceful state, he drifted off into dreamland. It was afternoon when Chu Lian woke up. The moment she blinked and moved a little, He Changdi woke up along with her. For a period after waking up, Chu Lian was still in a daze. A slight throb of pain from her body served to remind her of what had happened. When she looked down at her now deflated belly, her almond-shaped eyes went wide, and she mumbled under her breath, "My belly." Changdi quickly sat over at her side and held down her slender shoulders. "Liana, Uncle Meow said that you can't move too much after the birth." Upon hearing her husband's low, magnetic voice, Chu Lian turned to look at him. "Hubby, our child? Do you want to see our child?" Changdi truly relaxed when he observed the clear look in her eyes and the healthy flush on her cheeks. His nimble fingers reached out and tucked some stray locks of hair behind her ear. Chu Lian nodded impatiently, her eyes alight. That was the child she had birthed, of course she wanted to see them. "Is it a boy or a girl?" Changdi was carried along by her excitement. His eyes softened as he looked at her. He turned his body slightly and held her head in his hands. A tender kiss was placed on her pink lips before he whispered into her ear, "A boy." Chu Lian didn't show any surprise. Her eyes turned into crescents. No matter the gender, she loved their child already. She was observing Changdi's expression. When she noticed that he didn't seem to be happy at all when speaking of their child, Chu Lian immediately frowned. She asked hesitantly, You don't like our child?" Thinking back to Changdi's past experiences, Chu Lian's heart was filled with uncertainty. Since he had already gone through one lifetime, he might really dislike children somehow. Chu Lian's thoughts were all displayed clearly on her face. Changdi instantly realized that his wife was thinking too much again. He stroked the side of her face with his thumb, then moved his hand over to the center of her brows. He pressed down the furrow that had developed there. "Not at all. He's the child you've given me, how could I not like him? I'm just a little angry that he made you suffer so much during his birth." Chu Lian hurriedly shook her head. Although she had indeed suffered a lot during the delivery, and she had even wanted to die from the pain, the feeling of having a tiny new life by her side, one that she had made herself, turned all of her complaints into tender affection. Thinking of how the little fellow would soon grow up bit by bit, learning how to walk, to talk, and to call out to his parents, as well as how he would become a strong man, her heart was filled with endless anticipation. This little guy was their legacy for this earth, a wonderful existence. "Bring him over here for me. I haven't even seen him yet." Changdi had no choice but to rise and head over to the outer room. He passed on the order to the senior servants outside, who then told the nursemaids to bring over the little heir. Their 2 nursemaids had been chosen beforehand. Both of them had been born in the Jingan estate as family servants. They had clean family backgrounds and were in their 20s. While their looks were rather average, they worked hard and efficiently, and they had good personalities. Senior servant Zhong smiled as she brought the newborn heir in and set him down next to Chu Lian on the bed. Changdi helped Chu Lian to turn a little so she could see the tiny newborn swaddled up in a bright red blanket. Chu Lian had been expecting to see a fair, plump and cute little baby. She hadn't thought that her child would look like a flushed little monkey. She seemed sullen as she reached out to touch the baby's tiny flushed cheek. "Why is he so ugly?" It was Changdi's first time looking at his son too. Just like Chu Lian, his brows drew together in a frown and his expression turned dark. Senior servant Zhong and the nursemaids didn't know what to do with this new set of parents. The senior servant spoke first and quickly refuted, "Nonsense. Madam, what are you saying? How is our young master ugly? He's very handsome. Look at that high nose bridge. He'll surely look like master when he grows up. Millimeter, his lips resemble madam's more, and his skin is fair and white, just like madam's." After a round of explanation from senior servant Zhong, Chu Lian finally realized that newborns all looked like that, as wrinkly as an old man. It would take a few days before his skin would start to turn more fair. However, Chu Lian just couldn't tell how their flushed newborn was like them. Senior servant Zhong's eyes must have some special power. Looking at her tiny son's face, motherly affection bloomed within Chu Lian's heart. With senior servant Zhong's help and guidance, she carried the little baby in her arms. Once the little bundle was in her arms, the light weight of his body made Chu Lian feel that her heart was melting. The little fellow suddenly moved his fists a little and his tiny lips formed a pout. Chu Lian watched his actions with fascination. The nursemaid standing nearby smiled. "Madam, young master must be hungry." "Hungry?" Chu Lian hurriedly asked senior servant Zhong. "Momo, can I feed him?" Senior servant Zhong sighed. "Madam, you don't have any milk right now. Why don't you let the nursemaids handle it first? If madam and master have some time, why not give young master a nickname?" Before the little guy was born, they didn't know if it would be a boy or a girl, so Changdi and Chu Lian hadn't decided on a name. Furthermore, they still had their parents above them. It wouldn't up to them to decide their child's official name, but they could still give him a nickname. Chu Lian cheerfully agreed to the suggestion. After hugging her child for some time, Changdi was worried that it would affect her rest, so he ordered senior servant Zhong to carry the child out. Chapter 704, Little Stone, 2. Chu Lian laid back down in bed and looked up at Changdi. "Hubby, what nickname should we give the little guy?" "Whatever you like." Changdi tugged the blankets over her and poured some honey water for her. He fed it to her carefully. Chu Lian was in high spirits over the nickname. It was rare to get this chance, so she definitely wanted to give their son a fun and interesting nickname. Actually, she still hasn't rested enough. Once she finished her lunch and drank some nourishing soup, she drifted back to sleep. When Changdi came out of the bedroom, he was met with the sight of Lai Yu waiting anxiously outside. Lai Yu whispered something into Changdi's ear, immediately causing a change in his expression. He gathered Chu Lian's servants together and handed down some orders with a cool face. After that, he went into the room to look at Chu Lian once more before hurriedly leaving with his men. In the blink of an eye, Chu Lian had already been on bed rest for a week. It was now the middle of December. The weather in the capital was getting colder and colder. The winter winds were like blades trying to pierce their way into the bodies of the people. After a good rest over these 7 days, Chu Lian could now get out of bed and walk a little with someone else's support. She wasn't able to breastfeed Little Stone in the end, she just produced 2 little breast milk. Little Stone would only be able to have 1 or 2 mouthfuls before it ran out. Seeing that they couldn't continue this way, she gave up and left Little Stone to the nursemaids. Pebble was the little heir's nickname, chosen by Chu Lian. The little fellow was fierce and demanding when drinking milk. He wouldn't stop until he had his fill, and his cries were especially loud. Since his temper was as rough and hard as a rock, Chu Lian had called him Little Stone as a joke. The maidservants had joined her in calling the baby Little Stone, so Chu Lian decided to give him that nickname in the end. During these 7 days, Little Stone had finally grown out of that red, flushed skin that his parents had commented on, and he had become a cute, fair and chubby baby. It took about that much time of staring for Chu Lian to finally discern that he really did have some features where he resembled Changdi, especially his nose and ears. When he smiled, he looked absolutely like his father. Senior servant Zhong had the best understanding of this, as she had seen Changdi when he was young. She would often joke that Little Stone was exactly the same as his father had been as a baby. However, the happy and harmonious atmosphere in the rural estate couldn't reach the hostile situation in the capital. Although it was close to the end of the year, there was no air of celebration to be found anywhere in the capital. The weather was desolate and the citizens were tense. During the week that Chu Lian had been in confinement to recover from the birth, Changdi hadn't returned at all. He had only sent 2 letters back in secret. From the contents of the letter and the tense atmosphere in the capital, Chu Lian could guess at how bad the situation was at court. Every day, whenever she played with her son, she would be filled with worry for Changdi. On the 16th of December, Yuan Zhong's army suddenly appeared outside the capital. On the 17th of December, the news that the emperor was gravely ill spread from the palace. This night, Chu Lian teased Little Stone for a while. After he fell asleep, she had the nursemaid carry him to a side room. Just as she had laid down, there were 2 muffled sounds from the courtyard outside. Chu Lian perked up her ears, but she couldn't hear anything after a long while. Thus, she ignored it. Changdi had posted guards and their family's soldiers outside on watch, so there shouldn't be any problems. However, just as she was about to shut her eyes and sleep, Wenqing and Wenlan came running in a panic. Chu Lian sat up and frowned, using her expression to prompt them silently. Wenlan was panting for air, Madam, assassins have come. The guards couldn't stop them." "What?" Chu Lian's mind exploded with shock and alarm. When she finally regained her senses, she hurried towards the side room immediately. Little Stone, Wenqing and Wenlan followed right after her. However, when they wrenched open the door to the side room, they saw one of Little Stone's nursemaids being held tightly by a tall man in black. The nursemaid was so frightened that she was crying outright. However, she was still dutifully holding on to Little Stone in her embrace. The baby was still sleeping soundly in his swaddle. Chu Lian instantly froze to the spot. Wenlan held on to her and kept her standing, while Wenqing stood in front of them with her sword drawn. She questioned coldly, "Who are you?" "Let go of young master." The man holding the nursemaid didn't even twitch. While Chu Lian's face was still deathly pale, in this time of danger, she became icily calm instead. She narrowed her eyes, a sharp and somber glint clear in her gaze. While her voice was still soft, her tone was so cold it could make her enemies tremble. "Xiaobo Jian, reveal yourself." Wenqing was still shielding Chu Lian behind her. Chu Lian was only wearing a thin robe with a plain cloak she had hurriedly pulled on. She looked both simple and elegant, giving off the air of a fragile flower, but her back was as straight as bamboo. An imposing expression was fixed on her pale face. There was the sound of a man's chuckling resounding from the door, with a hidden sense of delight. A man whose beauty outshone any woman slowly stepped out from the darkness into the dim circle of light cast by the lanterns around them. Tall and slender, cloaked in a black cape, the man's hair was pulled up high into a jade crown, leaving his smooth forehead bare. Xiaobo Jian raised a single eyebrow and closed the distance between him and Chu Lian in a few strides. "Liana, I knew you would guess that it was me." Chapter 705, Exchange, 1. Xiaobo Jian narrowed his fox-like eyes. While he looked to be gratified on the surface, his smile didn't reach the corners of his eyes. Deep in his gaze was a lake of frost. After Xiaobo Jian made his appearance, the tension in Chu Lian's heart changed instantly to a dead calm. She stared closely at the man before her. Her soft voice had morphed into a hard and tough one. "State your terms." Xiaobo Jian started a little. He hadn't thought that Chu Lian would get right to the point. He was slightly unhappy with how Chu Lian had caught him off guard. He was even more discontent with how Chu Lian had been tense and cautious ever since she had caught sight of him. "Liana, I haven't seen you in so long. Can't I just come over to meet you?" The beautiful man kept his voice soft and low. Others might even think that Xiaobo Jian was currently whispering sweet nothings to his lover, when he was actually brandishing a blade in threat. Chu Lian stared at him with her lips pressed together. She completely ignored his lie. The last traces of a smile faded from Xiaobo Jian's face, leaving behind a cold mien. "I've only come to help Liana out, I don't have any bad intentions." Chu Lian snorted inwardly. Did Xiaobo Jian think she was blind? Little Stone's life was in his hands right now. How could that be any good intention? "Put down the child and the nursemaid. I'll go with you." Astonishment showed briefly in Xiaobo Jian's eyes. He hadn't expected Chu Lian to agree without any word of protest. Chu Lian looked at him seriously, her resolution clear in her eyes. From meeting her gaze, Xiaobo Jian understood that her decision was firm. Since time was of the essence, and Xiaobo Jian didn't have the time to continue bantering with Chu Lian, he waved at the person next to him. The black-clad man holding the nursemaid moved forward 2 steps. Chu Lian stepped out from behind Wenqing's back. Wenlan caught hold of her and said anxiously, "Madam, you can't ignore your own safety and put yourself in danger. If you go, how are we going to face master?" Chu Lian turned and smiled faintly at the 2 sisters. She gave them her last order: take care of Little Stone. Wenqing and Wenlan had been serving Chu Lian for so long that they understood her personality well. They knew that Chu Lian couldn't change her mind once she had decided it. Hearing this, they could only nod and allow Chu Lian to go. Furthermore, this was the only way they could save the young heir at this moment. Xiaobo Jian had brought all of his assassins along with him today. The guards that Changdi had left behind weren't their match at all. Even if they fought to the death, They likely wouldn't be able to turn the tables around. Chu Lian shot a look at Xiaobo Jian to tell him to release the hostages. The black-clad man looked over at his master, before slowly releasing the nursemaid. Once the nursemaid was off his hands, he instantly turned to capture Chu Lian instead. The nursemaid carrying Little Stone was immediately pulled by Wenqing, and the maidservant stood in front of the pair to guard them. Wenqing and Wenlan watched Xiaobo Jian warily. However, Xiaobo Jian wasn't paying attention to them or the young heir anymore. He simply turned to look at Chu Lian, whom the black-clad man had brought to this side. A smile appeared on his face as he said, "Liana, you're looking more and more charming by the day." Chu Lian met his gaze coolly. "You're not leaving? If you don't leave now, it'll be too late for you." Faced with such words from Chu Lian, the originally warm expression on Xiaobo Jian's face changed. He let out a cold order, "Go." Chu Lian was carried by two men in black. They quickly left the rural estate and boarded a carriage that had been hidden some distance away. Soon, they disappeared into the darkness of the night. Once Chu Lian had left, Wenqing immediately sent a messenger to He Changdi before leading the rest of the guards out of the estate. Chapter 706, Little Stone, 2. On the dark and quiet road, there was only the sound of the hoofbeats and the carriage wheels turning. The group of mounted men guarded a carriage as they headed at top speed towards the capital. Within the carriage, the atmosphere was filled with tension. Chu Lian sat in a corner of the carriage with her eyes shut and unmoving, as if all this had nothing to do with her. Xiaobo Jian sat in front of her, his sharp and sinister gaze constantly watching her. It hadn't been long since she had given birth, so Chu Lian was supposed to be in confinement still. She was only wearing a plain casual dress right now. For the sake of keeping warm, she had pulled on a light purple vest. Her black hair was loosely tied up with half of it cascading down her back. The only accessory she was wearing was a simple light purple headband with rabbit fur accents. Her body was still weak from the birth. After the commotion just now, her face was as pale as a ghost. However, the pallor didn't reduce any of her beauty and made her seem like a poor lady in need of protection instead. Her moist eyes now contained a glint of resolution, giving her a strangely attractive aura. For some reason, Xiaobo Jian felt that the current Chu Lian was even more attractive to him now as compared to before she had married. His eyes were set aglow, like a starving wolf that had finally found some prey that he was satisfied with, and he wasn't willing to let it out of his sights. Deep in Xiaobo Jian's perverse heart, he was still imagining how he could break the stubborn woman before him and how he could make her into a pleading and sobbing mess under him. He wanted to break her wings, so that he would become the only one she could rely on. She would become his exclusive plaything. Thinking of that, his entire being started trembling with excitement. Even with her eyes closed, Chu Lian could feel the weight of his invasive gaze on her. She bore with the discomfort and tried her best to ignore the nausea rising within her. However, Xiaobo Jian wasn't willing to let her off so easily. He chuckled lowly, "Liana, aren't you curious where we're going?" Chu Lian thought for a bit before opening her eyes, directing her clear gaze at Xiaobo Jian, who was seated across from her. It took a moment before she could speak. "I'm already in your hands, is there a need to ask that?" Xiaobo Jian's face sunk as he abruptly lost the desire to tease Chu Lian. Chu Lian watched as his face shifted through various emotions. Finally, he spoke up again, "Liana, was there ever a time when you truly liked me?" Chu Lian felt that Xiaobo Jian was a joke. Even in this situation, he still had to ask her a question with an answer as clear as day. If she had been the original owner of this body, she might have tried to come with an answer that he would be happy with. Unfortunately, she wasn't the original Chu Lian. Chapter 707, The End, 1. The Imperial City had been sealed off since last night. Currently, there was an oppressive tension within its walls, like dark clouds gathered over a mountain. The entire Forbidden Palace had been invaded and was now under the control of Yuan Zhong, who was part of the Sixth Prince's faction. The Imperial guards and soldiers of the palace had already been captured, and Sixth Prince was now seated in Wanmin Hall, where the Emperor was recovering from his illness. By the ailing emperor's deathbed sat imperial concubine Wei and sixth prince. Before Xiaobo Jian had even brought Chu Lian to Wanmin Hall, imperial concubine Wei was already earnestly trying to persuade the emperor. Your Majesty, with the palace in this state, you no longer have any other choice. With a wave of her hand, a young attendant brought in a tray and walked up to the emperor's bed. There was a golden imperial decree which was already open on the tray. The contents of the decree had already been written. The throne was to be passed down to sixth prince. The only thing left to complete the decree was the special jade seal in the emperor's hands. The bedridden emperor's face looked worn and haggard. His sharp eagle eyes had already lost their past luster. He stared dead on at the woman before him wearing a false smile, boundless hatred carried within his gaze. In the past, one look from the emperor would have been enough to make imperial concubine Wei cower, but now imperial concubine Wei acted as if she hadn't noticed the fearsome look from the emperor. Her smile grew even brighter, as she was visibly delighted with the circumstances. She spoke charmingly, Your Majesty, if you don't have the strength to hold the seal, you could tell this concubine where the seal is. This concubine will help you to press it down. As if he didn't want to continue looking at imperial concubine Wei's false pretense, the emperor shut his eyes and turned his head away. The instant the emperor shut his eyes, imperial concubine Wei and sixth prince's expressions turned cloudy. Sixth prince tossed his sleeves forcefully and strode out of the hall with an overcast expression. The subordinates waiting outside immediately knew that they hadn't accomplished their mission just yet. In order to properly succeed the throne and be recognized by the people as the new emperor, a successor needed two things, an imperial edict and the imperial jade seal. The decree could be faked, but the seal could not. Sixth prince had the palace in his control, but he couldn't kill the emperor just yet, because he hadn't managed to obtain the imperial jade seal. Is Xiao Wujing here yet? Sixth prince asked coldly. Although he was only 15 years old, he had plenty of ambition to make up for his young age. One of his subordinates had just gotten the news and had been about to report to the prince when sixth prince had come asking himself. Replying to Your Highness, Sir Xiao has arrived at Taihe Hall. He should reach Wanmin Hall in no time. The good news lifted sixth prince's sour mood. Has it been done? Sir Xiao has reported that all is well. He mentioned that Your Highness should not worry. Sixth prince couldn't hold back the laughter that bubbled within him. All his pent-up frustration had faded away with that piece of news. I knew Wujing wouldn't disappoint me. Sixth prince personally walked to the front of Wanmin Hall to wait for Xiaobo Jian. While leading a group of men over and swiftly walking towards Wanmin Hall, when Xiaobo Jian caught sight of sixth prince standing impatiently before the hall, a corner of his lips tilted upwards, forming a sinister smile. Back inside Wanmin Hall, imperial concubine Wei let out a strange smile while watching over the emperor in his bed. She bent over to get closer to the emperor, and whispered into the emperor's ear, Your Majesty, it's fine if you don't want to hand over the jade seal now. We've prepared a nice present for Your Majesty. By then, Your Majesty must remember to hand over the jade seal in exchange for the present. Otherwise, Sister Yi will never forgive Your Majesty. While imperial concubine Weiss was soft and cloying, her words were like a venomous snake spitting out venom. It served the effect she wanted on the emperor. He abruptly opened his eyes, showing off traces of his usual imposing aura as he glared furiously at imperial concubine Wei. There was no longer the pall of sickness hanging over him. He had transformed into a brutal and regal lion who had just been provoked. What did you say? Despite her earlier swagger, imperial concubine Wei seemed to have been silenced by the sight before her. She didn't dare to speak another word. After some time, she regained her senses and looked closely at the emperor's overcast expression. It was then that she remembered that the man lying in the bed before her was no longer the most respected emperor of the dynasty, but a sick and dying man who was succumbing to a slow-acting poison. The spike of fear that the emperor had drawn out in her slowly subsided. She chuckled. This concubine would advise Your Majesty to save some strength. Otherwise, what will you do if you expire before you get to meet Sister Yes flesh and blood? It took a few beats before the emperor adjusted his mental state and faded back into the sick and dying monarch. He couldn't give the game away now after acting for so long. If he threw his temper around now, then all of their efforts would go to waste. As expected, not too long later, Chu Lian was pushed into the hall by 6th Prince and Xiaobo Jian. Upon seeing the bound Chu Lian, the emperor's expression almost cracked. Chu Lian had already heard about the other identity that her body had from He Changdi. Like He Changdi, she had never thought of using this identity to do anything. Unfortunately, that wasn't the same for others. Facing the current situation, she didn't show too much surprise. Even the gaze she directed towards the emperor wasn't too shocked. 6th Prince was satisfied with his father's change in mood. He snatched Chu Lian over from Xiaobo Jian's hands and held her against him. In his right hand, he drew a dagger and placed it against Chu Lian's slender neck. "Father, if you don't want my dear sister to leave this earth at such a young age, I would advise you to hand over the imperial seal." The emperor was trembling with the force of his anger. If she hadn't been tied down and threatened, Chu Lian would definitely have burst into laughter. The emperor hadn't been poisoned at all. Back then, Great Dr. Miao had already told them in private about the emperor's condition. The slow-acting poison in the emperor's body should have been treated by now. Chapter 708. The End. 2. 6th Prince and Xiaobo Jian stared fiercely at the emperor. The emperor's inner struggle seemed clear to the onlookers. He finally sighed and shut his eyes. With some difficulty, he opened his eyes yet again and gestured at Eunuch Wei, who had been standing by the side. His voice was hoarse as he ordered, "Take it out." Eunuch Wei was astonished. He opened his mouth, thinking of persuading the emperor otherwise, but under the steady and resolute gaze of his master, he backed down and sighed helplessly. The eunuch turned to a hidden area within the hall and activated a mechanism, before retrieving an exquisite golden box from within. 6th Prince instantly flushed from excitement. He completely forgot about Chu Lian and let go of her. The prince made it in front of Eunuch Wei in just a few steps. He snatched the box from the eunuch and opened it up impatiently. When he finally saw what was inside, his entire body trembled from excitement. It was the Jade Seal, the real imperial seal. As part of the imperial bloodline, every prince had learned how to discern the authenticity of the Jade Seal. 6th Prince was no exception. Just as 6th Prince was overjoyed at the turn of events and was dreaming about how he was going to ascend the throne that had been fought over by millions of men, the box was suddenly lifted right up from his hands and he was bound by ropes. He was in utter disbelief at everything that had happened in an instant. His eyes nearly bulged out of their sockets. When he found out that the one who had given the order to tie him down was the person he had trusted the most, extreme fury flooded his heart and he reacted like a mad dog. "Xiaobo Jian, what are you doing? Have you forgotten your place?" 6th Prince had bellowed his little heart out. He shouted for his guards to save him, but no one moved. He lost his senses and started screaming wildly like a lunatic. The sudden turn of events had also managed to stun Chu Lian. However, she didn't stand there in a daze for long. She looked around her and quickly found a corner where she could hide in and shifted that way. Although the hall had been surrounded by Xiaobo Jian's men and she knew she couldn't possibly escape at this moment, she could still lower the amount of danger she was in and keep herself safe for now. One presented the golden box that he had stolen to his master. Xiaobo Jian let out a sneer and dug at his ear, as if hating the clamor that 6th Prince was making. He shot an eye at the black-clad man holding 6th Prince. With a single chop of his hand, 6th Prince fainted right over and collapsed to the floor. When the emperor discovered that Chu Lian wasn't in any immediate danger, his heart relaxed a little. However, he didn't show it in his expression and continued acting like he was on his deathbed. He glared at Xiaobo Jian as if he couldn't believe everything that had happened thus far. Xiaobo Jian seemed to be pleased by the fearful and dismayed look the emperor had sent him. He smirked and walked towards the emperor. "Your Majesty, was all of this beyond your wildest thoughts?" The emperor coughed as he questioned indignantly, "Who are you? What are you aiming for?" Xiaobo Jian let out a burst of laughter. "Who am I? Of course your Majesty wouldn't know me. But I'm sure your Majesty hasn't forgotten about Xiao Rong." The emperor's expression shifted instantly. This time, he wasn't acting. He was genuinely shocked. Xiao Rong. What a familiar name from his memories. Xiao Rong had been his sworn brother. During the fight for the throne, he had also been his greatest ally. By the time he had ascended the throne, Xiao Rong had become his most trusted leader of the Imperial Guards. Unfortunately, later on, that all-powerful man had committed a major crime and his entire clan had been sentenced to death. The Xiao clan then vanished into the annals of history. You're Xiao Rong's son. Now that the truth had been revealed, the emperor realized that the beautiful man before him did have some resemblance to Xiao Rong. What a discerning eye you have, Your Majesty. You're truly worthy of all the effort I've put in to avenge my father's murder. The emperor abruptly burst into an intense fit of coughing. Chu Lian was simply acting as an observer to all this. She frowned slightly as she thought. She didn't know what had happened in the later half of the novel, so she had still been in the dark about Xiaobo Jian's other identity. The great enmity between him and the emperor was completely out of her expectations. Have you ever thought that there would come such a day? Ha ha ha. Today, not only will you give up your life to be buried with my father and clan, but your dearly beloved daughter will go down with you. Aren't you glad? Don't worry, you won't suffer for long. You'll meet my father soon. Xiaobo Jian was clearly overjoyed. He took a sword from one's hands and charged towards the emperor, blade pointed straight at his heart. Chu Lian was startled by the sudden movement. However, from where she was standing, she couldn't possibly reach Xiaobo Jian. Even if she had been a little closer, she wouldn't have been able to save the emperor. Just as Xiaobo Jian was about to execute his revenge, one seemed to have heard something and immediately reached out to stop Xiaobo Jian with a grave expression. Master, there are some unwelcome intruders outside. Just as one finished speaking, black-clad guards poured in from all directions into the hall. In the blink of an eye, Xiaobo Jian, one and the renegades were all surrounded with no way to escape. Chu Lian had just taken a step backwards when she was immediately wrapped into a warm, solid, and safe embrace. It wasn't until he Changdi had Chu Lian back in his arms that his heart finally settled down. Only the heavens knew how hard his heart had been thumping on his mad rush here. Chapter 709, The End, 3. Xiaobo Jian took in the sight of the hall surrounded by Prince Jin and He Changdis men. His mind couldn't wrap around the reversal of the situation. His hand trembled as he pointed at He Changdi and Prince Jin. You. Before Xiaobo Jian could process the shock in his mind, the sick and dying emperor suddenly stood up from the bed. His eyes were bright and clear and he spoke with grave authority. He no longer looked like an ailing and powerless old man. Xiaobo Jian's eyes went comically wide. Lu Luan, you're not sick. You were acting. Lu Luan was the emperor's real name. Ever since he had taken the throne, it had been many years since anyone had dared to call him by his name. Xiaobo Jian really had some guts. One stood in front of Xiaobo Jian with his blade drawn, trying his best to protect him. The emperor pulled Prince Jin and He Changdi up, then sneered coldly. He roared out his order, "Take down these traitorous rebels." Immediately, the guards swarmed over One and Xiaobo Jian. One's martial arts skill was superb. Even while protecting Xiaobo Jian, the guards couldn't get close to him at all. He Changdi drew his sword and jumped into the fray. After 15 minutes, One collapsed to the floor, dead, while He Changdi had captured Xiaobo Jian. Xiaobo Jian no longer had any of the distinguished bearing of a top scholar. His appearance was wretched and his hair was in complete disarray. He glared furiously at the emperor and shouted, "Lu Luan, you traitor! My father was wholeheartedly loyal to you, yet you destroyed my entire clan just because you feared his power. You tyrant!" He Changdi had already returned to Chu Lian's side, and was now hugging her gently as they watched this drama unfold. The emperor walked over to Xiaobo Jian, who was being pressed down to the ground by some guards. He looked down upon him contemptuously and let out a cold snort. "Your father never told you the truth. Xiao Rong had brought his own death upon himself. He had been sworn brothers with the emperor, but that didn't extend to sharing their wives. He had taken a liking to Yi Zun back then and had tried to pursue her. Later on, he had also tried to drive a wedge between the emperor and his father. If the emperor had not taken precautions in advance, he might have come to a gruesome end courtesy of Xiao Rong. After finding out the truth from the emperor, Xiao Bojian didn't look like he believed it, but it wasn't important now. The emperor first shot a look in Chu Lian's direction. When he met with Chu Lian's indifferent gaze, his heart fell in disappointment. Finally, he turned to imperial concubine Wei, who had hunkered down into a corner and was trying her best to turn invisible. Imperial concubine Wei shuddered when the emperor's gaze fell upon her. 3 months after the crown prince's grand wedding, the emperor abdicated from the throne. Right before he abdicated, he wanted to give Chu Lian the title of royal princess, but his gesture was rejected by Chu Lian. In Chu Lian's heart, she was simply the object of the emperor's lingering affections for Yi Zun, and she wasn't actually the emperor's real daughter within. She would feel guilty if she received too much glory and honor from that relationship. In the 2 years after Prince Jin took the throne, He Changdi entered the cabinet at 25 years of age and earned the achievement of being the youngest ever minister in the cabinet. That very same year, Chu Lian got pregnant again. Living her life within the capital, with the accompaniment of her lover, good food and good friends, time passed peacefully and beautifully for Chu Lian. The end. TL note. That's it, everyone, the end of Transmigrator meets Reincarnator. Thank you so much for your support over the past 2 years. I wouldn't have made it to the end of this novel without the comments and encouragement from all of you. I hope you've enjoyed the story of how Chu Lian met and tamed He Changdi, and I hope my translation was smooth enough to convey the original story by Snow Mountain Mists properly. Some of you have asked what my next project will be, and I'm sorry to say that I won't be taking up any more translation projects. After translating for 3 years, the constant typing has taken a toll on my body, specifically my wrists, and I need time to recover from the damage. On the bright side, one of the helpers for TMR, MYST, will be taking up a novel of her own. It's a novel about a reincarnated girl making the most of her new life in a rural farming area. Of course, there's tons of food porn as well as cute shenanigans in there. MYST is still working on the novel and it'll be out on Vola sometime soon. That said, thank you once again to my team, Rendered Reversed, Premonition and MYST Tilda. Love, even though TMR has ended, feel free to hang out on Vola's Discord server and our #Transmigrator Meets Food channel. I'll still be there to answer any questions or just for a simple chat. 3. Timebun. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.